Uh, the idea from what we discussed on WhatsApp was to settle on two kind of more administrative things. One is that, a long time ago, I told you guys that I got this invitation that I relayed to the research group to write for the next edition of Crisis and Critique. They're publishing in September, if I'm not mistaken. I was trying to find here more details about it. They're publishing in September an edition which I think the title is something generic, like it's politics possible today, something like this. And as usual with Crisis and Critique, they are inviting, like, they just get very famous people's emails and then try everyone. Like Lula is getting an email, Evo Morales is getting an email for this edition. Probably none of them is going to write. I know Álvaro Lineira.
I spilled my.
Oh shit! Yeah, yeah, I should spill his cup. I know Álvaro Garcia Lineira, the ex-vice president of Bolivia, is participating, and some other big shots. And just wanted to see if I could find the list here. But anyway, ultimately they change it all the time. I'm not sure if it's a trustworthy list. Just to say, it's probably going to be something that circulates a lot. It has a different audience than that journal where we published last time, The Sum, which is more, they call themselves theory fiction, right? Whereas Crisis and Critique considers itself like a mostly Marxist journal of politics and philosophy. Like they have all sorts of people publishing, not necessarily like strict Marxists in any particular sense, but that's, it's a slightly different kind of frame. So guys like Alberto Toscano published there. I think I found it here. Let me just confirm. No, I didn't. But yeah, anyway, a lot of people, nice people published there. It's I would say it has a kind of Althusserian kind of approach, pretty much because Agon Hamza, who is the main editor, is like a huge Althusser buff. But so they invited us to publish so we could do something. And I think that now is probably a good time to start thinking about what this would look like. We know now from the previous experience that we probably need to, have a strategy of how to have many people write together. But this time it's probably not going to be so, freestyle, because the journal is a bit more strict, even though I think it has even less a limit of pages, because they've published like 800 page long PDFs before. So we can try to go for a record. Even so, yeah, I found it here. Is politics possible today? Zizek, Tsipras. Let me post it here. I don't know some of them. Some of them are apparently Evo Morales is confirmed, but I don't believe this until I see. And they were at the time inviting these ones as well. And these other ones here. I don't know. And ultimately, always looks a bit different than the actual list that they. Yeah, it's just like the way we use it when we already send an email, but they're not totally confirmed. Like we do double confirmations. Like we send an email, they say yes, then we add a plus. Then when we reconfirm later on, that's when we consider it done, Lula is on the
that
list.
Lula,
with no plus
yeah,
next to it.
That's sad. That's just sad. I don't think we should publish if Lula is not. I mean, if Lula is not publishing, maybe we should think of other venues.
Yeah. So you guys can find out who half of these people are. Like, who is Karl-Heinz Delvaux? I don't know.
I think this is a value form theory guy.
Is it?
If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken.
So, I mean, last time I think that's, holy shit! What the first thing that appeared in Wikipedia is that he's a German terrorist. So there you go.
Great minds think alike, you know.
So yeah, I'd say it's a bit fun, but definitely it's a different audience, right? And last time when we wrote the paper, it was really cool because it kind of organized our meetings for a while. It was, facilitated everyone working together. So I guess it's a similar opportunity, though we might have some lessons from last time that we want to, either repeat or avoid. Yeah, so Delvaux is definitely a character.
Yeah, I heard of him because I think it was somewhere, maybe in a Yape thing, or maybe a Heinrich something that I was reading was mentioning. As being some kind of theory. So I thought it was like, well, I will lump him together with the value form theories, but not sure if he's one. Anyway.
Well, it's good to know what sort of politics goes with value form theories, because I was having a hard time. So yeah, I mean, we set out in the beginning of the year to try to do something that was less on the side of describing social formations and like this large scale stuff. And we said we wanted to focus this year more on kind of strategy, organization, kind of collective organization stuff, right? I think Renzo's last presentation was like definitely the best example of something in that direction thus far, because it brought together the 2 or 3 things we were trying to do this year, right? Case studies, connecting the large scale stuff with, truth, these formalisms to more politically driven questions, and also introducing more kind of organizational tools and so on. So I'm not sure if we want to keep that kind of general frame for this text. If we want to try something totally different, I don't know. So I think personally, the only thing I would try to do is to try to repeat, in some level, the experience we did last time of having many people writing, finding a way. It doesn't need to be the same strategy, but some strategy for accommodating, not necessarily, everyone's agreements.
I was wondering if we could maybe split into pairs or threes. Instead of people writing individually, we could, we still have to define what we would write about exactly, but I think it could be a nice experiment, and we could use some meetings, not all of them, of course, for each little group to do a presentation that will be the basis of their section of the article.
Mm-hmm. There's one thing that we need to, just before you, I think one lesson that was pretty important from last time is that very few people wrote something totally out of the way of what they are privately doing anyway, right? Yasha was one of the few. In fact, he actually wrote a general introduction, and it's not like something he had just laying around, kind of pre-prepared. But a lot of the texts were just intersections between people's private or personal research, and the collective, right? So I think this really facilitated it last time. So we need to just make sure we don't set up like too difficult a task, like everyone writing, you know, from scratch something new that they need to study because they don't have it like already in their head, you know, because it might make it much harder.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I think I don't know if this is something that would make people excited or not, but I think we have enough material in the past meeting. This could be a constraint, not trying to base a text on books or articles or whatever, even if that can be that could enter into what is written, but I think if we select only from the material worked in the meeting, that could be and only summing it up, synthesizing, trying to connect, it could be enough for a text that will show some cohesiveness out of the attempt to organize the ideas that have been floating around. It could be an exercise that maybe it's not. And I think it's good because there's a material that would be previously defined that wouldn't be too extensive. It's something we've been going around. And at the same time, it's an exercise that allows people to write something new without actually having to read tons of books. And so we move around without actually having to move too much, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just on Saldanha's example, I think because something came to my mind while he was saying, I think this is a great idea. And it would be good not only if we consider like the meetings that we had recently, so like meetings that were happening, but also things that we are planning for the short term. Like, for example, I've been running away from doing the meeting on Rodrigo's new book, for example. And then my last attempt to run away was to actually like, we put it like forward like a month or something with me and Renzo doing it. And it would be a good idea to actually like pair up and work on that and then have people maybe get on board after that meeting and then write something, because then it can be based on something that we will do, but we know that we will do anyway, and we will have the feedback of the team, and it will be like an open thing and people can reach out. I think it's actually like the most sort of like labor saving alternative that still moves us forward in the way that the Atlas did, but a little bit differently.
You know, one thing
when
that
we start with that, I think could be also just going back through the Atlas, which I've been slowly a little bit doing, especially other sections, right? To even like facilitate the cross references even more.
Mm-hmm. That has to do with what I was going to say, because my impression is that for the Atlas, we had one kind of lucky strategy, which is we came up with that very broad diagram, and we could really slice that one thing into many, many things, right? Part of the reason why we could do that is that we were publishing on a very adventurous journal that was really up to kind of, we said like, yeah, the text is like a spatial thing. They were like, sure, go for it, right? I have the impression that there is one restriction in Crisis and Critique, which also for a matter of elegance, even we should consider, because we created a journal inside a journal last time. We created a small booklet inside a journal. I think that something like that won't look so kind of polite this time, like it's not really fitting to the journal. So that means, in my opinion, that probably the text will have, even if this comes later, it probably will need to get connected in a more linear way than the previous one, to read like a text rather than something which, you know, has separate sections inside of it, like a booklet. So more like a continuous text. Well, stitching together slices to make up a whole is actually the inverse of the strategy we did last time, right? We played with that idea, right, from in our nerdy parlance of well, there's something like a conciliation, which is where you have a local object, everyone agrees on it, and we disagree on the global perspective. So we all stitch the global perspectives to that one object. This time it might be the case to try to go the other way around and actually stitch the local differences and do a global thing that is cohesive. You know, even if it's just stitching together at, like, we write a section and then the next section that comes after it, we try to connect it afterwards, you know, but probably is a more fitting strategy this time. Yeah, we should come up with a name for the tactic of creating a journal inside a journal. But so probably it's a better tactic for the format of the journal, and perhaps even for what we've been doing this year, right? Because, for example, between my presentation, Dennis' presentation, Renzo's presentation, Renzo with Rafael talking about Rodrigo's book, all of it might not totally coincide, but perhaps it's not that hard to find more direct stitching points, you know? Even going back to the stuff in the Atlas, like a lot of sections there could have been stitched together in this other way. So I have the impression that that might be a good kind of general effort this time, you know? Probably shorter stuff also, I would guess. So we don't go over 100 pages on purpose. And then perhaps find a way of processing this. Like everyone writes small bits in like duos or whatever. And then we have a run of trying to stitch them together in a way that it reads linearly, right? Which is something we didn't have to worry last time. But I think in this journal, it might be a good idea. Just one more thing. I'm not sure what you guys think about it. Just crossed my mind now. But I think also one thing that happened from last time to this is that a lot of new people joined. And a lot of people who are, let's say, settling in also to the ideas we've been discussing, even though we know they're quite kind of out there, they're not all cohesive, but whatever, there are these ideas floating around. One way of doing this that could be kind of serve both purposes at once is to try to pair up people who have been working on this for longer with people who are arriving, so that when trying to like summarize, make cohesive this section, we also get to, you know, introduce and discuss the background in a clear way for newcomers as well, you know? Because I think it would be bad to alienate people who just joined and they end up not writing and not participating because, you know, to create a coherent line of argument, it would take like more intimacy or something with the material. Like this could be a way to benefit both sides, you know? I'm not sure what you guys think.
Yeah, I think that's an idea. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think this is a good idea, especially because I think one of the main problems of stitching is working alone. Because when we work in pairs, I think in some sense, the stitching will already begin. It will be less the working out of whatever someone is trying to synthesize, and it will be more something that is not actually, doesn't actually belong to someone in particular. So it will be on the way of becoming a text that is done by a collective in a way that I think if people did their parts separately, I think it was a fun experiment in the Atlas, but I think this will be some interesting discipline. And I really like this idea of mixing the new and old members. I don't know if duos or trios, because I think it depends on who is committed, like who wants to participate in this effort. We have to get this clear, I think. Not in this meeting because some people may not be here, but I think we need to get this as clear as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I was also just going to say, I think to Gabriel's idea of kind of writing together, I think that would also involve kind of writing, editing, and kind of reworking one another's work more so than we did as well. Which is something to consider that, like, I think we might have to a degree, try to separate the content from like the individual person for each contribution, because you don't want to feel like, oh, it's just like this other guy maybe messing up what I wrote before or something, but there has to be some sort of like push and pull tension. I don't know how to negotiate through that, but it is an interesting idea. It could work.
I mean, and I think that also this could justify like organizing specific meetings from now to the time of having the finished text. Like probably there are gaps in making these connections, you know, like this could actually give a reason to organize certain meetings. Like, yeah, we know what this section would be like, or this section would be like, but we don't know how to connect them. Then, you know.
When would it have to be submitted by?
Probably
September?
like, I think it's usually like if it's out in September, probably like mid-August.
Okay, so we have some time.
Also,
you know,
it
like,
seems to me,
sorry,
if
sorry,
we're going to do it, sorry, if we're going to do it in pairs or trios, maybe it's better to have more people in each cell. Otherwise, we won't have the control of the number of pages. If you don't want to, you know, write a book inside a book, if we just pair up, it will be still a lot of texts. And if we write in 3 or 4, it will be less text. So maybe it's like a kind of control of the size of the text.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I think that two suggestions. One is that I think that we shouldn't, though my impression is that this is a good idea to say, okay, let's make this a bit more linear. But making it more linear and trying to stitch the end of sections in a coherent way doesn't mean that we necessarily need to all submit to making like the most, you know, step-by-step, totally cohesive argument that everyone agrees with every step. Because, I mean, this is the sort of thing we've been trying to avoid. It's been productive not to do it. So it would still require some creativity, what it means to have something that's linear, but keeps this space for us to intervene and say, okay, this thing exploring, you know, kind of a path A, it might take you to something that's not going to be recuperated later on, or doesn't agree with what appears later on, you know, but not have such a free form as we had last time of like the metaphor of the elephant seen from many perspectives and they don't necessarily agree with each other, but some other way of still allowing for dissent or lack of total cohesion in the arguments, you know, even though it would have to be a bit more linear and not read like separate small essays, you know. It didn't end up like that, honestly. Like if you read the atlas, it's ridiculously coherent. I mean, it's really coherent, but just as a principle of prudence, perhaps.
I was thinking that there are a couple, I mean, I think there are lots of ideas that we could use, like if we, depends on how experimental we want to do this. But I think one way of doing this, of making it more linear without closing all the gaps as if that was possible, is we could do 2 phases of the writing, where one of them is each pair or trio or whatever works on a part of the text, and then it meets with the group that is behind them and after them. So there's no total group, there's no total meeting that stitches everything up, maybe in the last moment, but that could be some sort of way to provide a sort of cohesiveness, but without eliminating all the friction, because we would make it a bit open-ended in a sense, because there wouldn't be a final, a total structure that would make everything into one cohesive whole. And
I
the
like
other
that
thing I was going
idea.
to suggest,
It's like a good neighbor policy.
Yeah. You're only committed to your neighbor.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah. I think I've been reading too much Sérgio Ferro. So, and the other thing I think, but I think it depends on what you guys, how up to it you are. We could do like what's it called? Sorteio. How do you say sorteio? I forgot the word. Brazilian. Please help.
Like pick a number, like a
draw.
lottery kind of a draw.
Yeah. I think we could draw either draw the groups. Yeah, either draw the groups randomly, or draw the parts that each group is going to be responsible. It could also have an interesting effect. Not that we can't talk to, like, if you are in a group that someone who knows more of this subject, you can talk to them, but it could be also an interesting exercise. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't be so arbitrary with it, like play some itching with the text. I mean, we do have to deal with the fact, like, okay, what's going to be written? You know, like, still there's that question of the content. Like, probably once we settle on some points, you know, we should take the path of least resistance, of people who are more interested in that or something, just to facilitate. Even people who are like coming now, surely they will have preferences over. Yeah. I like the idea of, you know, try your luck with the section, but I wonder how much more work that would give us, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Two other things. Like, the first is one thing that I think can guide us in a nice way, because there is one thing that is already linear and heterogeneous. Yeah, that would be really great.
We can put the good neighbor policy on the sentence writing. I mean,
on the sentence writing, yeah. Imagine this, one of us writes the first, and we can try this on WhatsApp just to see what happens. We can do really cool.
We can do this if you guys are up to it. We could like do a final page, which is like we're gonna do some
Oulipo exercise,
some experiments, like but only in the end, and then we do each.
You know, we could do that for that interview we're supposed to do. Like, one person writes the first sentence, and the second writes the second, and there we go. But one thing I was going to say is that we actually have already something which is linearly linked, though heterogeneous, kind of following a path, but not really, which is the order of our meetings. They're bound by time, therefore they're chronological, so they are linear, but they don't really add up and something like that, right? So there might be an idea there of how to structure something. I also think that probably it would be a good kind of material, especially to help introduce people who are arriving now into the ideas that are more or less established, at least as points of contention, not necessarily as like truths, but to go over that in some way, right? I mean, for example, I don't think it needs to be like this tutoring system all along. Like, let's say there is a section of the text where we need to recuperate or sum up some ideas which are more or less established. Well, people who are arriving now might find it, you know, cool to go back in previous meetings, try to find a summary that they think makes sense. We all discussed it, and, you know, just with those resources, you might also, like, without having to start from zero, you know, still have the text play this double role of writing something outward, but also helping us organize inward. So I don't know about this previous material, if there isn't, like, in the very structure of the meetings, you know, one coming after the other and so on, if there isn't something there we could use. But the other thing, which I think also offers a really good skeleton that has to do with content, is Renzo's last presentation, because it had a really cool, I mean, I know it's not finished, so there might be spoilers that undo everything, but like starting with, you know, he managed to get like case studies, then introduce like specific issues concerning systems, boundaries, interactions, and so on, and went over both of our big kind of recent topics of organization, those that triad, and the Karatani, the logics and the diagram really quickly, to go back to this organizational theme. So there might be a version of a skeleton for a paper that connects through these things. I don't know.
I like the idea of starting with case studies this time around, since it also connects nicely with the proposal of the number of the issue, right? Is politics possible today? So to start with case studies that might not only illustrate the general thesis, but also put pressure on the thesis. Like, how can we think with the apparatus that it came up with, was constructed in this time that we were working together? How can we adapt it? What use can we give to it regarding specific case studies? And I think the case studies have to be well, chosen, and not only illustrate the general thesis, but also be problematic regarding the general thesis, the theoretical, I'd say, framework, which is more interesting. And then we can maybe test the framework through case studies in that sense. I'm sorry, I wasn't here last week because of the issues that I was talking about. Yeah. So I have to go back and see what Renzo did with it. So
I think you're gonna like
it. Position of ignorance. Yeah, I'm talking from a position of ignorance now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that from like just out of the top of my head, I think that a lot of material was presented that we could definitely show that we could use it productively. The school occupations, right? Either in São Paulo or more generally. Not only is Renzo here, but Ingrid was here last time, and also Vitor Silva, who joined, had a view from Goiás, right, of the same process. So there might be something there. I think probably finding I'm not sure if the courier strikes, because Renzo already started working on that, if it's not something we might want to continue developing. I wonder if we want to try something outside of Brazil. Like I mentioned to John last time about Occupy, because it seemed like a good counterpoint to the school occupations, right? He didn't go very much into it, but it seemed like might be, it's quite a paradigmatic thing as well. Though, from Renzo's presentation, one thing I could tell is that if we were to put it to paper, like it would be very long, like to actually, it's amazing how much politics is compressed, isn't it? Like when you actually start to unpack like a situation, there's so much information you need to take into account to make any meaning out of it. Like it was meant to be the introduction to his presentation, but like really long discussion, very intricate and interesting with like moments and stuff. So I think it's a good thing to take into consideration also, how to.
What was the comparison between Occupy and the school occupations?
Renzo presented, I'm talking over him, but the main example was the school occupations in São Paulo. And it just hit me afterwards that possibly we could use Occupy, which also had like some similar tactics of occupying spaces and so on, to just compare the two, like to have it, but it wasn't done. We didn't do it. One thing we could do, even is just to divide groups in terms of cases, like, and not even have like purely theoretical sections at all, like just apply theory on the cases as we go, try crazy stuff. And then people just judge it by like, just introduce it enough to apply it, That could be like totally different.
We should have a section on the CSII.
Yeah, for example, we could do that. Yeah, finally.
Was bad last time. I was pissed that we
didn't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we could do one on that.
I wonder if we start to include case studies, it will start to be a new atlas.
But the good thing about case,
I think it will. But anyway,
no, but
I'm working. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
No, the good thing about reality is that it is in time and space. So it's easier to organize like linearly in history. So we could be helpful in that sense, like case study 1, 2, and 3. If one is before the other, even if they superimpose, that justifies why it's linear, right? In some sense. And why at the same time, it's not totally cohesive because they're different things.
Yeah, I still think it will be like if we put more than 2 case studies, or like even 2, it will be a 30-page affair or a 40-page affair. And it's hard to imagine.
Each
I
one
mean, I think
will be 40 pages.
Yeah, no, I think because one is because I think I think the problem, as always, is we have too much to say and too little space. But and I think it's a problem that's multiplied, or like, because we are like a bunch of people. So it's like, it's not only that we
It's
have
always
a
a
bunch
problem.
of topics. Yeah, so it's like I think if it would be more interesting, like, to focus on one case study as an occasion to explore the different problems that we are trying to touch. I don't know. There are no solutions, of course, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know how to solve that. Like, personally, now that I think of it, I tend to prefer perhaps like just doing kind of case studies with, you know, necessary theoretical apparatus to go along with it. The theoretical apparatus might not be always the same. That would be justified because you should use the tools that help with the case. So that might make sense. A lot of theoretical background, we can just link to the atlas, to meetings and so on. So we don't need to say everything in detail. Like, it would spare us the need to construct the cohesion of the theory ad hoc, you know. And it would kind of push us to do what we said we wanted to do, which is to have more collectives and movements coming over and talking about it, but like perhaps restrict it, like to a couple of them, you know, that we're going to work again, like have more people from school occupations, kind of the courier strikes, which we already have Renzo's text on it, and we could work on top of it. I don't know, something like that, you know, and then have larger groups. But I totally understand what you're saying. Like, I can definitely see, like, if we select 6 case studies and then each one has like 3 people working on them and each one delivers like 20, 30 pages, again, we're back at 180 pages territory. So
yeah, but I do think now that you say it, I think selecting 2 or 3 case studies does present formal constraints that would oblige us to try and work them out, not only in a size, because I think this is something we have to really, I think we have to be disciplined about this. I think we do have to have a page limit beforehand, and we have to be, because it's a positive constraint. It will make us do things that we wouldn't do otherwise. And I think maybe, yes, okay, if we put 2 or 3 case studies and we try to make it a point of, if we try and make it so that we have to connect them in some way, that could also be a positive constraint.
Yeah, but look, just to make the case for it a bit more, you see how different this would be with regard to the atlas, right? The atlas we set out page constraints, but we exceeded it. Partially why? Because it was all about fleshing out, unfolding theory. So it was about saying more about condensed stuff. But when you use theory to see reality, the good thing about it is reducing reality to less, right? I mean, I said that Renzo's had used a lot of time last time, but it was nothing compared to the amount of information he condensed using the stuff he used, right? So it goes to actually it actually makes the opposite point, that it manages to condense a lot into, the good tools would be the ones that manage you to make you capable of saying a lot with not that much space, right? So I think we would be kind of compelled to write less by others in the group, because that's a good measure of if we're finding good tools, if we're applying them well, right? If we're looking at things in a useful way. So I'm saying this first because I think that in itself would be a constraint. Second, I think, I mean, clearly when we have like 14 people, 15 people writing, hopefully we get more people writing than last time. Like, with the exception of going totally crazy in the sense of people see that it's a book. It has a structure of a book inside the journal. But with the exception of that case, I think we should write a lot. I mean, it's a collective writing. Nobody's going to forbid it. Agon is going to love it. I mean, I don't think having a long text is going to be a problem. The problem is if it doesn't look like a text. You know, that was my point. Like, if it looks like it's separate sections, we just push them all into the journal because we were allowed. I think that will look bad. But if it's a really long text, you know, I think it's fine. Like, and since it's a lot of people,
if it looks like a 100-page article, it's okay. If it's a 100-page book, it's not so okay. So yeah,
like we should have sections, not chapters. Yeah.
It could even be a 100-page book if it's like a monograph and not a collection of chapters.
Yeah. There were like 80-page texts already there, like, and they do like 500, 600-page long editions. That's not in itself an issue. I can confirm with Agon, but I'm just saying so, but I definitely agree we should have constraints. I just don't think they should be so strict on something that might go against the benefit for us of working through these things. You know, like, I would probably try at least 4 cases, like Dennis and Yasha were talking about, you know, the housing crisis and housing politics in the States. Renzo already started working on the school occupations. There's a courier strike. We could try one more, for example. You know, I'm not sure if Michael wants to continue developing the Jackson one, which could be really, really cool, you know. Probably we should choose things that are also cool to have people over, talk to us about it, you know.
Related to that, I think also, since the journal is, the question is something like, is politics possible today, right? It might be interesting to have case studies that are maybe not, and this is part of my idea with the housing in the US example, is that maybe cases that are not 100% a positive example or positive answer to the question, at least like so far. Not to exclude it from the future, obviously, but I do think it is kind of going along that line of trying to learn from successes and failures at the same time. So it might be an interesting idea too.
Mm-hmm. I think like probably like the edition will have enough people to argue that politics is indeed possible, like in a lot of ways, for a lot of very abstract arguments. So like it will be already saturated with this sort of like arguments and and so on and so forth. So I think it would be good if we could actually give something like much more grounded than we did in the Atlas in a way. And I was thinking actually, like in terms of format, how it could actually look like, because one of like a text that I think that does this, not exactly this, but like it does something with specific movements very well. I'm thinking of Onward Barbarians by Endnotes, in which they have like, they sort of have like, everything has this sort of introduction in which like you talk about things in a very general sense, and then you do a sort of a mapping, like sort of like an independent mapping of that particular struggle, and then you go to the specific iterations of it, and like you go to like, okay, because what I'm seeing that a lot of the topics that we're talking about were topics that appeared also during meetings. So for example, I think like we talked at the end of my presentation, we talked a little bit about like platform work, but also like reproductive labor, for instance. It was something that appeared. Housing is appearing, I think, in what Yasha is talking about right now. So I think we could go from these issues and sort of like organize them in a way in which we can talk about like how housing appears overall, how housing appears in that specific in that specific instance as a political problem, what was the, like, what were the ways in which it was addressed and it became a political movement, successful or not. Because I think it would provide sort of a, because a lot of these questions are always spoken about either like very abstractly, at least like this is, and it becomes like, oh, housing is a problem within capitalism, within like, no very deep like contextualization of the general appearance of housing as a problem in capitalism, either like too specific in which like we talk about one movement as if it's like an isolated thing, a very local like addressing of it, but then you always take like the generality of the thing as sort of like a given. So like you go and you say, yeah, it's a general problem, but then let's look at this like very specific. And I think if we could like map it through the issues, as Yasha was suggesting, I think Rafael was also talking a little bit about it, it could be something very interesting and something that I think that like it has very little counterparts in how it's done. And another text that I think that does this really well is it's an older one from Midnight Notes. I forgot how it's called. It's one about the like the Gulf War mainly, and it's about like the surges in oil prices, and they take the surges in oil prices to actually be something about like house labor and reproduction. So like they streamline from that very big issue, they make an analysis out of it, and then they look at like the very specific forms of struggle that appeared from that, for example, and like they make this sort, then they go back to the structural side of things. And I think if we could make this movement from like looking at these problems as like interrelated and then a specific iteration of them and then come back, it would be some like, it would be something that could structure it well. So to structure it around the problems, then we have like these problems, how they get like addressed in particular. And I think that, I don't know, I think it could be something.
You know, like I think that there, one thing you're saying that I think is quite important is that perhaps there is a meeting to be had where we just read a couple of political analysis and discuss method of analysis, you know, because for example, the text that you mentioned, like I think the Midnight Collective one is a bit more in this way than the EndNotes one, but it's a bit more classical in the sense of giving a diagnosis of an age and then localizing politics inside that diagnosis. Like, see that movement there, it fits into this global view. Like if you compare this to the text that Renzo brought, I think for me, that text that he mentioned last time that was produced by the Poligremia, like they are describing the movement of students in Argentina, creating like some basic jargon for people who come after them to deal with what they did, you know, and it moved inside, like it had to be mentioned inside the political sequence as part of it. It wasn't like outside of it, you know? Like, I think that there's a debate to be had, like whether political case studies are more like the unit of big age diagnosis, like look at this from outside, it fits this general logic and so on, and how much it's a matter of like distilling problems that are still open and solutions that were already developed, putting them in a way that others can continue, you know? Like there is a whole discussion to be had. I don't know how to address this, you know, but there is some styles of doing this.
Yeah, I think Rafael was mentioning this a few, like when, right after we made the Atlas, I think there was a meeting which we were like sort of discussing the proceedings of the Atlas. And Rafael was actually mentioning that we don't really have, like when the case studies were being done, like we realized that actually there is very little like double questioning about what is to study a case actually, and a case of political struggle, and like that that was not a question, but it should be a question in which we should like take some time on after the Atlas. And I think that this is sort of like the perfect opportunity for it also, because it was thought before. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rafael's suggestion was to actually like make a corner out of it, so like make some 4 or 5 people that will work on it. But then it becomes, right now with this publication, it becomes a sort of question in which the whole group is actually involved in a lot of ways, which I think it's a productive thing, because it helps us develop also a style of like how do we actually like apply these? What is a good thing? What is a bad thing to actually contain? And even to deal with some like very grounded data in which like we can look at it and we can say, okay, how much does this actually help something? How much can we actually like elucidate something about politics from this very like contemporary movements? I think it would be a great idea if we could work on it.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to set up a sort of like agenda for working on case studies, both like in small groups, but also as a way to invite people to talk about it. And on the way, we also sort of like also learn on what's the right way to do a case study, right? What's the right methodology for it? So it's something that I think as we gather case studies, we are also like learning how to like talk about them. So maybe it turns out that for the journal, it's we can just like synthesize a like a common methodology we find, and then it becomes about that. But it might turn out that, or it might turn out that we can pick like 2 case studies that are like sufficiently different to illustrate many concepts of that we can use. But so I feel that it would be nice if we can structure like the agenda in such a way that we are sort of like producing case studies, and then on the way and also like forming this group so that we don't get like so loose on working towards the text. But I think along the way we might be able to sort of like have a better idea. If we're working around case studies, we'll have a better idea of what kind of stuff we can write. I mean, and there's also like that old idea of the bestiary. So that could also turn out to be like a separate text, right? A more like compilation of case studies, and this might turn out that these essays might have to be something more restricted and coherent, and that might just fit for one case study or another, or just like a more methodological thing. I don't know. But I like the idea of being able to invite people and working together in different ways to like treat cases.
I have a question regarding case studies. Let's see. So I think Yash or somebody mentioned the idea that welcome, maybe there's a spectrum there. Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that there's this kind of discourse level of case studies that might interest us, such as the Amazon event. But I wonder if that would kind of elevate to the level of being perceived by this group as a relevant case study. I'm speaking specifically of this thing that made like global headlines with the Amazon unionization movement. It's quite interesting case study, actually. But it's getting a lot of press. It's getting a lot of attention. And in this journal that they'll put out, I promise that it will be discussed there. So it may be interesting to bring the collective methodology of this group to that particular case study.
Yeah, but Daniel, one thing that I would mention in that case, though, I think it's definitely an amazing thing, which is also to have enough information, right? I mean, perhaps if we can invite people over, I mean, we would have to discuss to do a list of possible cases, right? And then we can discuss which ones seem to fit and why. But I think a good criteria is that perhaps like the most recent stuff might be also hard to, work in detail if we don't get, enough material on it to account for it as closely as possible. So that might not be the case with the Amazon one, because there's a lot of stuff being published, right? Perhaps we can get people over to talk about it, and it's definitely an interesting one. But I think it's just good criteria to have in mind, Though I personally, I find it very, very interesting.
Yeah, I do think a good kind of thing to go by is definitely maybe not proximity to all of us individually, but at least some of us have enough proximity to the issue to at least know about it, not necessarily be within it. But Daniel, your mother worked in Amazon distribution facility, didn't she?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Yeah, there could be, what you're saying is there's an important ethnographical, if you want to use that term, component, and I totally agree that there is. So, I mean, but Gabriel's probably right. We probably want to throw a bunch of possible case studies out there and maybe not vote, but, discuss them. And Amazon may be one of them that we consider. Number one. Number two, part of the text could also include an interview with the gentleman, Christian Smalls, the guy that was the leader of it. He probably would accept to do an interview. That might be an interesting component of the text. So if you have, like, what I'm saying, a firsthand account, and you ask them very specific questions, that might be, I don't know, that's just an idea.
Yeah. I think this is, I think this, what we are talking, I think it, in a sense, takes back to what Rafael was saying about what I mentioned earlier in another meeting, because I think we don't have a clear view of what case studies are. And I think this is a good problem in the sense that there is no single strategy for dealing with case studies. And I think this might be something that we could experiment, because I think what you're saying, Daniel, I think it's like, for example, having the interview, that would make the case study look like something. But we could have case studies that are not ethnographical in this sense, that it's dependent on interviews or firsthand impressions. I think this is what's open, not to debate only, but also to experiment, is because I don't think we have I think I wish it was good if Thiago was here, because he's a bona fide anthropologist.
Yeah, the professional.
Yeah, he's a professional, because I do think there's a lot of resources in anthropology, but I don't think anthropology frames the questions in the same ways that we are trying to frame. In a sense, I think we are trying to frame things that are a bit between whatever we are saying, our case study is a bit between the ethnographer point of view, but also the how do you say it? The conjuncture analysis, or whatever that's called. Because I think there's an analysis of forces, but also the way these lived experiences organize themselves. I think these are two different things that can be solved in many ways. And I think this is something that maybe we could try and experiment in, not only simply taking ready-made models, but I think we are already experimenting. I think Renzo's approach is one. I think I tried to do another. I think Michael did another. But I think the fun part is because this equation is not completely set.
Yeah, for example, just to go back to something that I suggested, like imagine that we use as a parameter to establish a certain chronology. So like the text can be divided by years. So, or, even though they are superimposed, you get the feeling that case studies, some are a bit older, like housing crisis in the States, so starts 2008 and moves towards the present. Then you go back, but start a bit later. So 2013 in Brazil, just to give an example. And then something more recent, like courier strikes. So you have like this chronology. If you have that line connecting, it becomes easier, for example, that one of these cases is just an interview, but one that is so kind of specific that you get the feeling that there is a specific perspective behind it. Like, for example, perhaps instead of interviewing the leader of the Amazon thing, you purposefully don't interview the leader, interview other people, ask questions that are not usually asked. So suddenly it makes sense to have that thing inside. So again, we can have very different strategies, but if we have something else that ties everything together, you know? So I don't know, just something like that to consider.
Yeah, I think Dennis is saying something really interesting on the chat, because like I think it is he's saying that like in a way we're gonna look like armchair philosophers anyway regarding a case study. And I think it's perhaps it might be good not to try to dispel this figure, because the usual thing is like you don't put yourself as someone that is a philosopher directly, like a philosopher approaching a social movement or something, but then you go on that, yeah, I'm just here, you know, being like echoing the ideas of the social movement, which I think is way worse and way more hypocritical than anything. Like, and to like claim that actually because of your proximity with this very first source material, you don't actually like put your own mind over there, you're just organizing and you sort of like put yourself in this comfortable position in which like you don't have any influence and you're just like bringing people in. I think there's something to be said about the opposite, about like, okay, as people that are organized politically, not necessarily on these, we don't want to run as a last resort of like neither an ethnography nor something that like trying to get a stamp of like credibility because we are interviewing people from there, but we are actually like navigating these as people that encounter these movements and want to learn from them. Some sort of like that sort of position that I think doesn't really disavow us as like people that are not like primarily involved, but tries to forge something else. Like, what is special about like trying to do that? Like, what do we try to learn in that situation? I think that's the question that we're asking after all. It's sort of like, I don't know.
Yeah, but I disagree with Dennis just a bit there, because I mean, you know, your armchair can be placed at several different distances from reality. So that matters. And I mean, I think that, for example, what I think Renzo showed very nicely, I mean, if we have any arrows and letters in this text, we are automatically already armed. Don't worry about that. That's not, I think that I agree with you. We should wear that proudly. But I mean, the richer the material, also the more challenging the questions. Like if you look every political movement from afar, you can say always the same things. Like, yeah, it's so amazing when people fight for justice, you know, and yeah, sure. So the closer you get, the more complicated the material is, the more you need specific tools to make sense of it, right? So where we place the armchair, like if it's very close, if it's very far away, I think makes a big difference, you know? And not to say just one thing, there is another thing which I'm always a bit skeptical of making this argument publicly, but I do believe it privately, which is, I think that if you set out a bunch of case studies of the last decade, you will see that questions of organization as like explicit problems emerge more and more and more, to the point that what we're doing falls inside the sequence, not outside of it. Like it's ultimately, I think not without too much. I mean, if we add the case study of the circle, you have that justification in there, right? That there is something taking place in reality during this whole decade that is coextensive with a bunch of hypotheses that are emerging here or around, you know, the stuff we're doing. So I definitely agree with the armchair, but I think that we can be a bit more bold with where we affirm the armchair to be, both in terms of how close to the things we're going to study, but as well in terms of being, you know, a product of that sequence, which we are, more generally speaking, you know?
I wonder if the subject of the article is not this discussion itself. Like, what is a case study? Since we did the atlas, we can just, you know, assume what we did in the spirit of what Dennis is saying, like a bunch of armchair philosophers, we did the atlas, and there's a kind of a theoretical framework there. And the paper might be just asking, what is a case study in a certain sense? Like, how do you apply something? How do you apply some theoretical framework to actual cases? And the question that I think maybe is tricky regarding this possibility is up to which point is that, does that overlap with the question, is politics possible today, in a certain sense? Because politics, of course, you can have this more immanent kind of conception of politics thinking itself, but also how can a theoretical framework or a certain view of I don't know, localized totality may help a political struggle? And maybe there is a kind of overlap between that question and the question, how do we as armchair philosophers approach the question of the case study? What is the case study doing when we already have like a theoretical framework that was put forward in the Atlas? Something like that. Like turning this, instead of this being like a preliminary question regarding what we will do, this be the question of make this the question of the paper, perhaps.
Yeah, I think we definitely, if it's not the central question, it needs to be addressed, because in our own thesis, we say you need to be like, you can only see so much depending on the organization from that serves as the lens, right? You know, the whole thesis where your own individual perception can be somehow enhanced by, but see, we're not necessarily in the movement, right? Or at least we're writing from the perspective that it's possible to say something useful even without being in the movement. So isn't that a contradiction, right? Our personal sensibilities are not being enhanced here. So how do we resolve that? Like,
I don't know, guys. I totally agree with what Caron said, but I just make sure we also don't fall into like a sense of who am I because my impression is that at least I personally take the opposite point of view of the Atlas, which is to say that, once you engage with the actual organizations and their decisions, things become more rational, not less rational, right? So you fragment your tools so you can be closer to the standpoint that each fight takes place, because that makes it more rational and more easily circulatable, not less. And therefore, just to give I think that I'll probably try to present something on this in the near future, because I think it connects to what we're saying. But I was recently approached by a guy who was trying to create like a private institute in Brazil and fund like research for left-wing people. And we were talking about it, and I could see that he was struck by this problem. Like, either intellectuals come before and they're policymakers and they create ideas that should be implemented, or intellectuals are coming afterwards, like Owl of Minerva kind of thing, and they're there to like recuperate, the residue of politics and to kind of account for the diagnosis of the age, and more descriptive, kind of almost anthropological kind of thing. And I realized that from the perspective we've been working, which has, I would take it as one of its ideas, this hypothesis that, movements don't compose together automatically anymore for structural reasons. Like, it takes some work of composing fragments of political life, that now you have a new position for intellectuals, which is the sort of in between the scales of politics, not before nor after, right? I have the feeling that this is exactly where something like this would place us, like, to show that you can take, it might even be a criteria for choosing case studies, to make sure we choose case studies that without some theoretical skeleton, people don't see so easily how they relate. And the moment that you add this skeleton, it's easier to see how heterogeneous things that look conflictive could be seen as part of the same, leftist ecology, right? So I have the impression that we should let's not just give in too much this idea that, well, if we're saying politics thinks, therefore we shouldn't prescribe from the outside, nor are we in the best position to like romanticize it afterwards. But we also came up with a third position, right? Perhaps we didn't develop it very clearly, but it's definitely more inside a political sequence than it might look like. Because if that diagnosis is correct, that political struggles are becoming more and more fragmented, less and less homogeneous to each other, finding like these translating points and ways to make one thing intelligible to the other is no longer like an intellectual endeavor you do from the outside. It actually has possible consequences, right? So it's more in the middle of it there. It's not in the forefront, right? It's like not the vanguard, but what's the opposite of the vanguard? Like retaguarda, like the last soldiers. The rear guard, not the vanguard, but it's still in the front, like it's still with everyone mixed there, So I don't know. I think that case can be made, though I totally agree this is an issue in itself. But it's something to think. I'm not sure. Like it looks to me like it's a bit like the sort of thing that analytic philosophers wanted to do for science in the pre-war years. Like we are, trying to find a way to connect different scientific endeavors, but it's not totally from the outside. It's like to facilitate that navigation, It's something similar for politics, like. So I don't know, the case can be made that this is not totally like, I'm not sure if it sounds too optimistic, but I think the case can be made that this is not totally extrinsic, as even though it definitely will look nerdy as hell,
Yeah, and I wonder if like the fact that we are in a sense a group that is also organized and also shares in a sense the problem of trying to compose. I mean, that is in itself something that guarantees a homogeneity to the problems that we are trying to deal. I don't think it's like something that we're going to solve theoretically. I think it's something that involves ourselves trying to untangle together what are the case studies that we want to deal with, why, giving out the reasons why. I don't think this is something that we can do beforehand, but I do think that this is something that might be addressed, especially because I think this is not a problem of ethnography in the sense that we are not trying to deal with another. Like this is not, they are not others. And I do think there's the problem of how do we establish a homogeneity that allows us to treat the problem? But I do think that's like, those are the tools that are worked out in the atlas than before, in a sense. So I think it's less posing the question explicitly and more feeling out where do we get homogeneous points where we can deal with them. So I think in a sense, it might even be good to deal with case studies that we are not involved at all, just so we can try and test out what are we able to rationalize in a sense. So, but I do think that it's not, we have to avoid, I think, falling into the problem that I think also anthropology falls, is like, there's another, we cannot talk about the other, only the other can talk about the other, and so nobody does anthropology. This is a discussion I have a lot with Thiago, so I'm going to dar esporro nele for not coming today, because there's a pitfall in current anthropology, which is every perspective, every point of view has its truth. No truth is reducible to other truth. Every point of view has to be considered, but the end game for that position is that anthropologists make themselves obsolete in the process. And we have these discussions where people like the objects of the study are saying, there's no validity to what you're saying because you're not whatever is being studied. And I think that's a problem, because that's not I don't think that's where we're going from. I mean, I
What you're
think
saying is
we
that
do.
anthropologists are not communists. So
Yeah, they
so
definitely
everyone is
are not.
another. Yeah. Nobody's an
Yeah,
equal.
yeah.
I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, just because I have to go, but I can make somebody else the host, so you guys can continue. Like, don't. Rafael, do you want me to make you the host?
Sure.
Okay. Just so I need to leave to the other thing. Probably you have to start recording, just if you guys want to continue recording, because I was doing it in my computer.
Okay, I can record.
Okay. Guys, see you later. Just like really late. I need to go. People are complaining here. See ya.